Welcome back, Roy. The noise bothered him the most. You think it would be the smells or the tiny cell or the knowing he was going to die soon, whatever they finally got around to killing him. But he could handle those things. It was the fact that this place was never quiet that really got to him. Didn't matter if it was a day or a night. There were always sounds. Clanking, screaming, crying, yelling, rattling, howling, banging. He tried stuffing his sheets in his ears, covering them with his hands, humming under his breath, but nothing drowned any of it out. He never really paid attention to the noise before prison, only knew that he liked the quiet, but now sound was everywhere. When he was a kid, classmates had made fun of him for all kinds of things. His ratty clothes, his missing mom, how hard he breathed right before he lost his temper. But a favorite had been standing next to him and pretending they could feel a breeze blown clean through his ears, one side to the other. He wasn't so dumb that he didn't get what they were saying. His head was empty, but he hadn't really understood the joke. But now he thought maybe he did, because all the constant noise made him realize that before prison, most days his head was quiet. He could work a 10-hour shift in Merle's garage, look up and see it was quitting time, and nothing would have gone through his mind except a few thoughts about which wrench to use. As a teenager, Dean sometimes couldn't sleep at night, tossing and turning in his narrow bed across from Roy's, keeping them both awake. In the morning, when Roy asked him why he hadn't slept, Dean would say, "Couldn't turn my brain off," or "couldn't get out of my own head." And Roy would have no earthly idea what that meant. But maybe it was like the noise in prison, a constant rumbling you couldn't escape. He wouldn't have liked that, wondering how Dean ended up with a brain so different from his. But he wouldn't have to listen much longer. They set the date for his execution finally. His lawyer had come to give him the news, not realizing one of the guards had already spilled the beans. Some guards were like that. They loved passing out bad news. But Roy hadn't reacted when he'd been told, and he could tell that pissed the guard off, especially because Roy could usually be counted on to lash out, give the guards an excuse to take out their frustration. Even when Roy's brain knew better, his fist never quite got the message. But learning his execution date hadn't bothered him much, definitely not enough to throw a punch. It was hard for Roy to get worked up about dying, not when he never cared that much about living in the first place. He worried about his grandma, but only a little. Dean would take care of her. Dean was good at that kind of stuff, and it didn't occur to him to worry about Dean, his strong, smart older brother. Dean would be fine, and he didn't worry about himself either. Whatever was going to happen to him was going to happen. He couldn't change any of it now. And really, he wasn't sure he would if he could. Maybe not killing those kids, even though he thought it was the right thing to do at the time. Maybe it hadn't been. He got upset when he thought about it too much, confused and anxious, angry about how wrong things had turned out in the end. So most of the time, he chose to pretend it hadn't happened. But the rest of that summer, he wasn't sorry for any of it. It was the happiest he'd ever been. He'd asked for chicken fried steak and twice baked potatoes for his last meal. Figured he didn't have to eat a vegetable like his grandma always said, not this time. And strawberry shortcake. He knew it wouldn't be as good as his grandma, but with homemade biscuits and fresh whipped cream, but that was okay. It would still remind him of the best meal he used to eat around the table with his family. Excuse me. Yesterday, there had been a visit from the prison chaplain, which was like a minister, he found out. He only agreed to meet with the guy because his grandma had begged, wanted him to get right with the Lord before he died. Roy thought that was stupid and a waste of everybody's time, but he did it because Dean said he should. Don't make this day any harder on Graham than it already is, you selfish asshole, had been Dean's exact words. In the past, that would have led them to rolling around on the ground, beating the shit out of each other. Sorry. But what was Roy going to do now? He couldn't exactly reach through the glass and punch Dean in the face. Besides, could be Dean had a point. The chaplain had asked him if he was going to say anything before the execution. Any final thoughts? About what? Roy asked, and the chaplain had signed. About what you did, Roy. Anything that might help the families find some closure. But those kids were already dead. Roy didn't see how anything he said or did now could make a difference. The families are going to be there? He'd asked instead. The dead kids' family? He pictured them watching him through the glass, watching him maybe crap his pants or drool and jerk around on a table. It was the closest he'd felt to panic since he learned his execution date. According to the chaplain, the boy's mom was coming, but Eliza's family probably wouldn't be there. Word would still get back to them about anything you said, the chaplain told him, like that was a good thing. Roy shrugged, promised to think about it, but he'd never been good at talking. He wished there was a way to explain what he'd been trying to do that night, but he barely understood what had happened himself. Didn't think there was any way he could make someone else understand. And even if he could, he still pulled the trigger. He'd been the one to fire the gun. Oh. Dean had asked him 100 times, especially at the beginning, why he'd done it, or if someone else had been part of it. Dean kept saying that maybe Roy knew something that would help him get a lighter sentence, like life in prison, something besides the death penalty. But Roy had kept his mouth shut, hadn't said a word, because it wasn't only his secret to tell. He was proud of that one thing, if nothing else. He knew how to keep secrets, how to protect people. Just like he never told anyone that he liked pulling the trigger. All the anger and resentment and uncertainty he lived with every day bursting out along with the bullets. It had been a release to watch the blood flow, to know that he was the one in control. For those few minutes, his entire life made sense. He knew exactly what he was doing and exactly why he was doing it. But he hadn't thought much about what would come after. The handcuffs on his wrists, the trial he barely understood, the tears of his grandma's face, the disappointment in Dean's eye. He knew now that he'd done a bad thing. He wasn't so dumb that he didn't realize that. But a bad thing for what he thought was a good reason? He had to believe that was something different. He wasn't scared yet, but he knew he would be as the day got closer, could feel the fear churning just behind his ribs, dark and snapping, gathering strength. He hoped he'd be able to look through the glass and see Dean in the final seconds, focus on at least one face that didn't hate him. Before he left, the chaplain had talked about forgiveness in heaven, but Roy wasn't looking for that. He didn't care about angels and pearly gates. He didn't need mercy or a warm white light. Quiet, silence, and endless nothing. That's all he wanted from what came after. Oh. Okay, chapter 17. We rarely used our living room. It was a formal space my grandparents had carved out, and all these years later, it still held the original furnishings. A stiff horsehair sofa that poked the back of your legs when you shifted against its cushion. Heavy dark wood tables and floral draperies that smelled faintly of mothballs my grandmother had sewn into the lining. My grandparents were long dead, but the living room had remained untouched, probably because we never really needed the space. There was a family room addition off of the kitchen with a comfy sectional sofa and a television big enough for a crowd. And my dad had his study on the second floor, a cigar retreat before Eliza died, his own personal speakeasy now that she was gone. Over time, the living room became the place where we had serious family discussions, the formality of the room leading itself to waiter topics, a bad grade in school, a necessary cutting back on spending money, a grounding after missing curfew, or talking back to our mother. Or like tonight, a daughter's betrayal. I come through the front door exhausted, wanting nothing more than to take a hot bath and then fall into bed. For once, thankful that my parents weren't interested in interacting, that we could all go about our separate lives and barely cross paths. But I've been greeted by my mother standing in the doorway of the living room. "Greer," she said, "please come in here. We need to talk." She sounded exactly like the mother of my teenager years, and I've been hit by a powerful sense of deja vu. Was I 14 again? But a quick glance in the hallway mirror confirmed I was an adult now, one with dark smudges under her eyes and panic in her gaze. I knew what this sudden meeting was about. I'd known it would come, but still felt unprepared. My second shock of the evening came when I walked into the living room and found my father sitting in one of the armchairs next to the fireplace, no bourbon in hand and his eyes only half glassy. My mother took a seat on the prickly sofa, gestured for me to sit beside her, but I remained standing, leaning in the doorway with my arms crossed, trying to project nonchalance, a touch of defiance already, but my heart hammered in painful beats. I didn't want to do this. I wish there was some way to make it stop. Sorry. "We heard about you and Dean Matthews," my mother said. I had a sudden vision of Dean and me tangling together on the floor of the refinery, his hands on my breast and my tongue in his mouth. I knew that wasn't what she meant, or at least I hoped it wasn't. The PG version was already bad enough. I wanted to deny, but that would only be prolonging the inevitable. I owed them the truth of it, at the very least. "We're friends," I said softly. "He's not a bad person." My dad made a strangling sound like he was choking on a mouthful of booze. "How could you?" he rasped. "What would Eliza say?" my mom asked. "He didn't kill Eliza," I said, voice rising, "and she was always the first person to forgive." Actually, I had no idea what Eliza would think about me befriending the closest blood relative of the man who'd blown her brains out. "I'm not trying to hurt you," I said, working to lower my voice. "Then what are you trying to do?" My mother worried her hands together, her raw knuckles scraping. "I don't know," I admitted, and that was the awful truth of it. I thought when I come back to Ludlow that I'd known what I was looking for, that my purpose was laid out clear as an X on a map. But as the days went by, I felt more adrift than ever, running in circles, looking for clues that weren't there, finding answers that only led to more questions, distrusting the people I loved, looking at familiar faces and seeing strangers instead, putting my trust in someone I barely knew. I was lost and had no idea how to be found. "This has to stop," my dad said. "We're your parents and we're telling you it has to stop." I looked at him, this man who'd always play Abraham Lincoln during Ludlow 4th of July celebration. Not only because he was tall and gangly, but because he radiated an honest-to-God goodness. Tom Dunning was a man you could trust, a man you could depend on, except when it comes to his own family. How long had it been since I'd been able to count on him for anything at all? Rage flared inside me, boiling over as it rose, my cheeks hot and burning. "Are you fucking kidding me?" I said. "Neither one of you has been my parent since the day Eliza died, and now you're going to sit here and lecture me, tell me what I can and can't do?" "Greer, my mom had half risen in her seat, her hand outstretched towards me. "I needed you," I screamed, all my anger and resentment unmoored, nothing left to hold it back or temper it. It was loose now, and we were all going to suffer for it. Eliza was the one who died, but you were both gone too. I was just a kid, scared, confused, and grieving. I needed someone to talk to, someone to trust, and all I had left was a missing in action dad and a mom who wouldn't look me in the eye. That's not true, my mom protested, but her voice was weak. She stopped reaching out for me, her arms back at her side. That's not how it was. It is, though, I told her. That's exactly how it was. The past isn't something you can change, Mom. I pointed at my dad, who was slumped back in his chair, eyes half closed, his pathetic attempt at momentary sobriety already fading. You're going to look me in the face and tell me it's not true. Neither one of you gets to tell me how to live my life, I said, voice shaking. You have no say. I've gone this long without parents. It's too late now. I don't need you anymore. When I left the room, my father had covered his face with both hands, my mother silently weeping on the sofa. Both of them looked old and broken and alone. I said I wasn't trying to hurt them, but that turned out to be just one more lie. Okay. I wasted almost an entire day sprawled across my bed. A kind of numb had settled over me, and I couldn't bring myself to move. I didn't want to leave my room and stumble across my parents, watch the pain and betrayal flash across their faces. I still hadn't heard from Cassie or Ryan and refused to be the first to reach out. That would feel like admitting something I wasn't ready to concede. Cassie was usually the one to break in these situations, making a peace offering neither Ryan nor I could resist. But thus far, my phone had remained stubbornly silent. I wasn't quite ready to give up and go back to Chicago, back to a job where most days I couldn't be sure I wasn't doing more harm than good. But I also didn't know what steps to take next. I had a feeling Dean either had already decided he was done looking for answers or quickly headed in that direction. Without him, I felt unsure. It was easier to stumble around blindly in the dark, crashing into people's lives and making a mess of things when you had someone, just as lost right next to you. So it was something of a relief when Dean called. I had almost expected never to hear from him again, to search for the truth about his brother slowly fading until its importance seemed distant, like a half-remembered dream. Maybe I'd be able to let it go, finally. But seeing Dean's name on my phone screen disabused me of that notion. I scrambled up to sitting, practically dropping my phone in my haste to answer the call. Dean's voice sounded hollow and tiny in my ear, like he was calling from the bottom of a well. Where are you? I asked. Grandma's garage, he said. I'm helping her clean out some old crap. He paused. I think I may have found something. What? I asked, sliding off the bed and already shoving my feet into the sneakers. Can we meet? He asked. I'd rather talk about it in person. He gave me directions to a spot on the outskirts of town, a place he said would be private and with low risk of being seen. I almost told him it didn't matter. My parents and probably the whole town of Ludlow already privy to our relationship. But despite what I said to my parents last night, there was a difference between them knowing about Dean and me and throwing it right in their faces. I guess I still had some kindness left in me after all. The directions Dean gave me led to a barely paved country road surrounded on both sides by fields. The road itself didn't have an official name. Most people called it Out There by Carl's Murdoch Place, because it was technically a dead end that dumped out onto Carl's land. But beyond where the road ended was a pond I knew people sometimes used for fishing. Carl never minded so long as they didn't make fresh ruts of his land and cleaned up after themselves. Dean had told me to meet him at the pond, and as I trudged across the open field toward the water, I felt a whisper of unease. Why here? And why now? But I told myself I was being paranoid. The past days of mistrust and anger burrowing into my head and kicking up dust. Dean was standing at the edge of the pond, his back to me as I approached. He had his hands stuffed into the front pockets of his jeans, and even without being able to see his face, I could picture it clearly. Pensive, serious, a little sad. I wonder if Dean had ever been carefree, if he'd ever been a kid who careened through the world with a permanent grin on his face. I couldn't picture it. He probably had to fight for every single smile. "Hey," I said, not wanting to startle him, although he had to have heard my feet cutting across the autumn-strutted prairie grass. A cow looed in the distance. A small huddle of them gathered around a weather-scarred water trough. Dean turned his head and looked at me. "Hey," he said. He didn't smile at the sight of me, and that fact pained me more than it should have. "This is an interesting spot," I said, joining him at the edge of the pond. A warning light flashed in my brain. Danger, danger, danger. And I kept my gaze averted. A couple of fat bullfrogs, big as kittens, peered at us from the edge of the water, and I eyed them warily. As a kid, I always balked at swimming in ponds, had an irrational fear that a bullfrog would swim up from the depths and sink needle-sharp teeth into my flesh. No amount of reassurance from my parents would dissuade me from my conviction. I thought about telling Dean so he could make fun of me, but he didn't seem in the mood for childhood stories. "Roy liked to come out here sometimes," he said. It was a good spot to fish, and not that many people knew about it. He didn't have to worry about anybody giving him shit or starting a fight. He told me once he liked how quiet it was. He shifted his body, and I felt his gaze burning into the side of my face. "But you probably knew that already, didn't you?" The whole world went still and silent, my head filled with static fuzz and cotton, my breathing short and labored like I was being suffocated. "What are you talking about?" I meant to sound ferocious, a lion attacking, but I was only a rabbit caught in a snare. Because from the second Dean had told me to meet him here, some part of me had known this was coming. "My grandma never said the kittens were under the porch," he said, turning to face me fully. "The ones that Roy saved during the trial, she said he saved some kittens, but not where he found them." "Yes, she did," I protested. "I remember." "Stop fucking lying to me," Dean yelled, and I flinched backwards. "I knew you were holding something back that day in the cemetery when you mentioned the kittens. I could feel it, see it in the way you kept messing with your hair, fidgeting. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. Because the last time I ignored a gut feeling, something terrible happened. So you know where I spent today? In my grandma's garage, like I told you, digging through boxes of crap for the trial transcripts. Roy's attorney had ordered a copy, but when Roy didn't want to file any appeals, he shipped them to us. I sat on that concrete floor flipping through the pages. I read every goddamn word of my grandma's testimony, Greer. She never said anything about the porch. Don't you dare fucking stand here and tell me that she did. Ooh. I covered my face with both hands, told myself to breathe as slivery spots swarmed against my closed eyelids. This was the thing I've been waiting for, the dark, hidden corners of my memory blown wide open, all my secrets spilling out into daylight. But now that the moment was here, I wasn't ready, realizing too late that I was never going to be ready. I felt dingers. Sorry, y'all. I felt Dean's finger rough in my hair, a stinging tug against my scalp. "Roy was the one who told you the kitten was under the porch. You were the girl in his truck, weren't you? The one my grandma saw that summer. The one with the ponytail. I nodded, trying to find my voice. Yes, I managed, a hoarse rasp against my throat. Jesus Christ, Dean said. He sounded almost surprised, like there'd been a part of him, maybe a big part, that had hoped it was all a mistake. I dropped my hands and looked at him. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to tell anyone. Not before Eliza, and definitely not after. It's pretty goddamn simple, Greer. Open your mouth and say the words. I was fucking Roy Matthews. Oh my gosh. I wasn't, I said, shaking my head. We just hung out for a while that summer, messed around a little, went on drives. Dean stared at me. You're going to argue word choice with me now? He shook his head. How the hell did it even start? At the refinery, I said. It had been a day in mid-July, hot and sticky, the minutes creeping by like hours. Eliza had been off with Travis, Cassie was babysitting, and Ryan had been busy helping his mom with something around the house. I felt restless for months already, itching under my skin in that way only 16-year-olds can understand. I was bored of Ludlow, bored of the small circle of my life, bored of myself, and I hadn't felt like there was anyone I could talk to about it. Eliza and I had never been the kind of sister who held late-night gab sessions, spilling our hopes and dreams and fears to each other. I could have confided in Ryan or Cassie or even my parents, but a stubborn kernel in my gut refused to let me do it. I wanted to nurture this angst, had some stupid adolescent idea that it was changing me somehow into the person I was always meant to be. So sure I was the first and only girl who had ever felt this way. It had been impulse that had led me to the refinery. Technically, I wasn't allowed to drive outside of town. My parents would have grounded me for weeks if they found out. But I was feeling defiant, angry for no good reason, almost desperate to be caught doing something bad. It's no wonder parents are always terrified for their teenagers. The horrible split-second decisions we make with no thought of the consequences, enough to keep even the most laid-back of parents up in the wee hours of the night. The afternoon sun had been blistering hot, the kinds of rays that made you wince when they fell on the back of your neck like a sticky hand. It had been a comfort to step through the doorway into the shadowy refinery, even with its trash-lined floors and history of bad deeds. At first, I thought I was alone. I hadn't noticed another car parked in a weedy gravel lot, only found out later that Roy always pulled around back. The risk of a popped tire from all the old lumber and nails littering the ground worth it to have his truck hidden from any curious cops who happened by. I heard him before I seen him. The sharp sound of shattering glass almost wrenching a scream from my throat. I managed to reel it back in at the very last second, nails pressing into the tender flesh of my palm. He hadn't noticed me yet, his back to where I stood frozen in the shadows. He had a paper grocery sack at his feet, and as I watched, he reached down and pulled out a green beer bottle, drew his arm back, and let the bottle fly with a harsh flick of his wrist. This time, I was prepared for the sound, and instead of startling me, it made something close to relief flow through me, an unwinding, a loosening of too many things held tight. Hey, I said before I thought about whether I should. Can I try? Roy turned so fast one of his tennis shoes skidded on the concrete floor, his legs sliding away from him. He righted himself quickly, eyes darting around the room. His hand fell to his back pocket where I later learned he always carried an ancient switchblade. One of his eyes was swollen shut and his upper lip was split. The knuckles of his throwing hand caked with dry blood. Who are you? He asked finally. Greer, I said, stepping closely. What happened to your face? A fight, he said, like it was a stupid question. Can I throw a bottle? He glanced down at the bag, shrugged broad shoulders. I guess. I reached in and took a heavy brown bottle, heaved it in weight in my hand. Aim for the corner, Roy said, where the wall meets. Don't want any pieces flying back. His voice was deep and rusty, like he didn't have a lot of practice using it, and his words came slow. Not like he was dumb, exactly, but as if he had to think about what each word meant before it left his tongue. I cocked my arm and threw a bottle as hard as I could, all my frustration and directness, anger settling through the air along with the glass. When it shattered against the wall, I whooped, raising both hands in the air and doing a little shimmy. Next to me, Roy grunted in what might have been approval. We'd taken turns with the rest of the bottles, slowly adding to the pile of glass shards on the floor. Once the bottles were gone, Roy finally introduced himself, pointed to a 6-pack of beer against the wall. Want one? We can throw the empties when we're done, if you want. He sounded almost shy, like he was asking me out on a date instead of offering me beer bottles for smashing. I'd only ever had sips of my parents' wine, shared the dread of stolen bottle of whiskey that Ryan had brought to the gazebo one night. But I nodded like I was an old pro, sat on the dirty floor with this boy I didn't know, and opened a bottle. I knew I was being stupid, that probably thousands of girls the world over had ended up raped or murdered in exactly this way. But I was suddenly enamored with the idea of myself as a girl who took risks, a girl who befriended someone most people would have avoided. I was brave and I was wild, and nobody looking at me right now would think Greer Dunning was destined for a boring, safe life. Too young to understand that being able to take a boring, safe life for granted was a gift. Roy was different from my other friends, I said to Dean, cutting into my own memories, and I was desperate for something different that summer. I was 16 and I was bored and dumb and so young. I swallowed a sob. I don't have a better reason than that. I wish I did. Did you even like him? Dean asked. Or were you just fucking with him? He was hard to like, I admitted. He barely talked. He had a chip on his shoulder so huge I couldn't even begin to navigate around it. But he gave me something I needed that summer. I remember riding around in Roy's crappy pickup, ducking down below the window line when we were in Ludlow, popping up again when we turned onto the wide open roads. When he pulled into some random field, I let Roy kiss me, push his hand under my t-shirt, and pull down my bra. Never further than that. We shared cheeseburgers and Coke from Sonic, chewing the ice pellets until my teeth screamed. He always paid, even when I offered. Now I knew he'd been stealing money from Merle's to fund our dates, being able to pull out his wallet and buy me something more important to him than keeping his job. We threw bottles at the refinery and fished in this pond. Some days we barely spoke a word. Other days, I talked and talked, eventually managing to pull a story or two from Roy, like drawing water from a dank hidden well. Roy was both my friend, in the loosest sense of word, and my darkest, deepest shame. I wasn't fucking with him in the way Dean meant, but I was using him. Probably I was. Wow, Dean said, shaking his head. I have to hand it to you. You managed to get both of us right where you wanted us, didn't you? All the sneaking around you and I've been doing, winding me around your finger, it must have seemed like old times. I didn't, that's not. How did you convince Roy to kill Eliza? He asked, talking over my feeble protest. What did you promise him? I took a step backwards, stumbling a little on the uneven ground. No, I said, I never even mentioned Eliza to him. Dean raised his eyebrow. You expect me to believe that? You were seeing my brother in secret. You've never told anyone about it. And he just happened to pick your sister and her boyfriend to murder? And then you randomly get a heart saying It was all for you? Come the fuck on, Greer. Nobody is dumb enough to believe that bullshit story. But it's the truth, I said, frantically trying to think of some way to get him to believe me, knowing that my word was no longer even close to good enough. Hanging out with Roy was the only thing I lied about. Dean's laugh was harsh, scraping along my skin. That's a pretty big omission. I know it is, but I never told Roy to kill anyone. I never hinted at it or even thought about it. I loved my sister, and Roy never said anything to me about wanting to hurt someone that way. I would have told Sheriff Baker if he had. Oh, yeah? Because you managed to keep your mouth shut about Roy for years? Roy was my secret that summer, but we weren't hurting anyone. It didn't seem like anyone's business but ours. And it's not like we were ever a real couple. I knew from the first second I met him that we had a short shelf life. By the time Eliza died, we were already winding down. I wasn't showing up every time we were supposed to meet. I never even gave him my phone number. It was going to fizzle out. I didn't see the point of telling anyone. And after the murders, I trailed off, not able, even after all this time, to give voice to the confusion and disbelief I felt the day I opened the newspaper and saw Roy's face staring back at me. It was like my whole world stopped, and it had never really started spinning again. How could I tell anyone then? My parents were broken into 1,000 pieces. The whole town was terrified and angry. Everyone would have thought exactly what you did, that I had something to do with it. I tried, though, in my own chicken shit way. I kept pushing and pressing and saying Roy wouldn't have acted alone, that there had to be something more to cover up. But nobody listened, and then the heart showed up. I sucked in a breath. I was 16, Dean, and too scared to do the right thing. You're not 16 anymore, he pointed out, voice hard. You're a grown woman. I know, I said, the words shaking on my exhale. But so much time passed, and every year it got more impossible to open my mouth. I stayed away and tried to forget instead, buried it where I didn't have to think about it, and I've had to live with that every day since. Dean cocked his head at me. Are you seriously asking me to feel sorry for you right now? Throwing my words from the first night at the do back in my face. They were more painful than I thought they would be. Made me sorry I ever aimed them at him. But isn't that always the way? We never fully understand the pain of something until we're on the receiving end. Before that, it's all a game of pretend. I shook my head, more tired than I've ever been. I didn't want to stand there and make excuses or try to justify what I'd done. We were long past any of that. Then what? He said. You broke up with him and your sister and Travis ended up dead? We never actually broke up, mainly because, at least in my mind, we weren't really together anyway. But he was angry when I pulled back, hurt. He'd been aloof when we did meet up, then pressed me to make future plans even if I told him I was busy. I think he thought we were more serious than we were. Of course he did. You were probably the best thing that ever happened to him. I couldn't have been that special, I protested, wanting to wrench away from the hot twist of guilt in my gut. He was still seeing Libby the entire time. Because he was hedging his bets, Greer. Roy wasn't book smart. Sorry. But he had decent instincts. He probably knew on some level he didn't even want to acknowledge that you weren't going to stick around. Maybe he was angry enough at me that he decided to kill Eliza. No way, Dean said. He wouldn't do that. How can you be sure? I just am. Remember when I told you Roy was loyal? That loyalty didn't end when someone hurt him or abandoned him? He pushed his hair back and pointed to a scar along his hairline I'd never noticed before. Roy gave me this when we were kids. After our mom walked out and never came back, I said something shitty about her. I can't even remember what. And Roy picked up a rock, a big jagged thing, and clocked me right in the head with it. He couldn't stand, even after what she'd done, to hear a word against her. There's no way he would have hurt somebody you love to get back at you. Why then? I practically screamed. Why did he do it? Because someone told him to, Dean said. Someone told him it would help you. I did it for you. That's what I'm still trying to figure out, I said. That's why I came back after all this time. I want to know the whole story, including my part in it. I want the truth. Except you wouldn't know the truth if it bit you on your ass. He said, all these weeks we've been trying to figure things out, and you've been keeping a huge piece of the puzzle from me. Did you think we'd get to the end and your relationship with Roy would never come up? No, I said softly. I was tired of hiding it. I'm glad you know. Some part of me had wanted to tell him from the beginning and wanted him to be the person to hear it first, to know his brother had done his best to treat me well. Every moment Dean and I had spent together, the more I wanted to come clean. But just like with Dylan and Addie's murder, I'd waited too long. Fear and shame dragging my feet, turning me into a coward. Dean laughed again. Well, I'm not. I wish I never figured it out. I wish I never talked to you that day on the bench. I was better when you were just some girl whose life we'd ruined. At least then I didn't hate you. Please, I said, voice breaking, but I had no real idea what I was asking for. Please what? Please forgive you? Please forget you're a fucking liar? Please forgive you? Please don't tell anyone. He threw up his hands. We're done, he said, already walking away. This is done. I didn't try to run after him, cling to his arm, or attempt to change his mind. There was nothing I could possibly say to undo any of it. I wondered sometimes why. It was a lesson I felt destined to learn over and over. And that's the end of chapter 17. Was this chapter heavy or what? It was pretty heavy. So Roy actually did it? And according to Dean, he did it because somebody told him to do it. And Greer was dealing with Roy? Wow. Okay, so let's try to put some pieces together. So Roy confessed that he did it. Dean believes that he did it for someone because he was loyal. And Roy and Greer had something going on. Who could Roy be loyal to make him kill Eliza for Greer? I still can't put the pieces together. What y'all got? Do y'all have any pieces that could be put together of Roy actually doing it? He did it because he was loyal. Him and Greer was dating. Who the heck did he do it for? The mom and dad? No. Anyway, we have 3 more chapters to go. We're bound to get some of these answers right to these questions. So I'm going to see y'all in the next chapter. Bye for now.